That administration has produced a world that is on fire in a myriad of ways, has produced 40-year highs in inflation.
A quarter of the country has rallied to him like he's the Messiah, and another quarter is willing just to look the other way as he desecrates the most basic norms of our democracy.
If they lose to Donald Trump twice in 3 election cycles, there's something deeply wrong that cannot simply be corrected by swiveling further to the left.
Everything that Ben and I worry about on the left gets worse under 4 more years of Trump.
Ben Shapiro and Sam Harris debate who the best candidate for president is on this election Tuesday. But one thing lurks in the shadows for Sam Harris, and that is that he deeply suffers from TDS and GDS. What is that? We'll talk about it today on Indie Thinker. Welcome to the show. My name is Reed Huberman. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I am happy to announce today that for the price of a cup of coffee at Starbucks, roundabout there anyway, you can become a member of Indie Thinker Media. Now, when you become a member of Indie Thinker Media, not only will that give you access to exclusive content, free ebooks, book reviews, and all sorts of other exclusive content, but it will also help us create the future of Christian media. Now, if you've thought to yourself, boy, I would love for there to be a Christian alternative to so much of the junk that we have in the mainstream, but have never found that Christians have really produced that. Well, that's what we're after here at Indie Thinker. Not only will we produce provocative content that will deepen your faith, but it will also inspire you and entertain you. I know, crazy thought. All of that can happen just simply with a $7 a month membership that will grant you access to all the things I mentioned before and help push us into the future. So if you want to do that, make sure to go to indiethinker.org/support. TDS, or Trump derangement syndrome, is the idea that a person or group can hate Trump so much that they take irrational beliefs about him and his policies. Well, way before TDS was roaming the streets among liberals, GDS was released on us by the New Atheist. What is GDS? Well, it's God derangement syndrome. And it's an irrational hatred toward religion, Christianity in particular, and the Bible. It was most evident in the New Atheist movement and can be seen in quotes like this. Some propositions are so dangerous that it may even be ethical to kill people for believing them. It's from Sam Harris. If I could wave a magic wand and get rid of rape or religion, I would get rid of religion. Also from Sam Harris. It is time that we admitted faith is nothing more than the license religious people give one another to keep believing when reason fails. Also again, Sam Harris. Now, everything you just heard is not a thoughtful critique or anything close to an intelligent response to religion. At best, they are schoolyard taunts from buttheads. And they're most at home on Twitch streams with Destiny and people like him. At worst, they are blind faith assertions of evil fanatics. In either case, the lasting legacy of such diatribes against belief in God is, in a word, deranged. Now, if you sense any bit of contempt throughout this episode for the New Atheist and Sam Harris in particular, I hope by the end you will see that such contempt is well deserved. The lasting impact, if anything, from the now dead New Atheist movement has been teaching a generation of young atheists not how to think clearly about religion, not how to interact thoughtfully, but how to be shallow, smug, and immature pagans who do not realize that they have a religion. It's just the worst kind of religion. It's one built entirely upon hate. Now, this hate is on display in a debate between Ben Shapiro and Sam Harris. Only this time, God is not the subject of Sam's ire, but Trump. And while I am loath to compare Trump with my Lord, I think you'll see the parallel very fitting. Whenever anyone is possessed by hate, it makes them deeply irrational, as you'll see in this debate.
Really, really happy to have both of you. I guess I want to start by setting the table with the most basic and fundamental question, which is giving each of you the opportunity to make your pitch to listeners, which is the question of who you're voting for and why. Sam, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's no secret at this point that I'm not a fan of Donald Trump's. And I'm voting for Harris. I would, the truth is I would vote for almost anyone over Trump, right? So a lot of this conversation is going to be talking about why I think Trump has disqualified himself for the role of president. And, I'm happy to talk about Harris as well, but I mean, that really is the the whole story for me. I mean, this is I would be voting against Trump with more or less anyone, because what I want really is normal politics, right? I mean, the fact that politics has taken up so much of our bandwidth of late, for 8 years, 9 years at this point, is a sign that something's wrong, right? And Trump is at the very center of that. So nothing I say in this conversation is going to come out of a feeling of my own partisanship. I happen to be registered as a Democrat, but I would vote for Mitt Romney at this point. I would campaign for Mitt Romney. I mean, a normal Republican would be absolutely fine with me. So most of what I have to say really has nothing to do with policy, even. Trump has announced some policies that I would disagree with, and we can talk about those. But the real issue for me is that Trump is the most divisive political figure to appear in my lifetime. And, we should get into the reasons for that. But whatever you think of Trump, right, even if you think he's great, you really can't deny that he brings out the worst in us, right? He brings out the worst in both his friends and his enemies. And Bret Stephens wrote a piece on this recently. So more than anything, I just want this experience of continuous political emergency to end, right? I want that to be behind us. And from my point of view, Kamala Harris, whatever her weaknesses as a candidate, would be just a much-needed return to normal politics, right? And this is, of course, this assumes that if Trump loses, he's not running again in 4 years, right? I mean, then I think that it keeps the emergency alive. But I mean, for all its flaws, the Democratic Party is a normal political party, and the Republican Party is now a cult of personality, which I consider to be actually dangerous. So, that's really my main concern. I don't think any of this gets better until Trump gets out of politics.
And to just draw a line under it, let's say the election was between Mitt Romney and Kamala Harris. Would you be voting for Mitt Romney or Kamala Harris?
Well, honestly, at this point, I would probably vote for Romney, but that really should not give any indication of how fully I favor Harris over Trump. I mean, I'm all in for Harris, right? I've given her money. I'm going to be honest about what I think her flaws are as a candidate, but my preference is as large as it could conceivably be. But I think Ben and I and you and I agree about many of the problems in the Democratic Party, and yes, I would view a normal Republican as a corrective to that, but I don't view Trump as a corrective to that. I'm sure we'll get into this, but I think everything that Ben and I worry about on the left gets worse under 4 more years of Trump.
Trump is a uniquely divisive candidate. Well, that's odd, because I don't know if you've heard in the news just recently, but Joe Biden called everybody that is a supporter of Donald Trump garbage. Now, the media did their best to try to run interference for this, but go back and listen to it for yourself. He clearly says that Trump supporters are garbage, and this is what he actually thinks.
The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
Because this divisive, venial, old, corrupt politician was only preceded by Hillary Clinton, who called all Trump supporters deplorable.
You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
Now, the only reason Sam Harris can argue that Trump is divisive and he's bringing out the worst in us and then totally have a blind spot when it comes to people on his own side is because, frankly, Sam Harris is an atheist. And he doesn't realize that politics doesn't bring out the worst in us when it's divisive. What politics has been doing is actually revealing what's really inside of each and every one of us. I would argue the same thing about social media, by the way, that social media doesn't bring out the worst in us. It just reveals to us who we actually have been when we allow ourselves to just let it fly, baby. So the truth is that if Trump merely only is revealing who we've always been, then we should actually congratulate Trump. And this is why I've argued in the past that polarization is a good thing, because actually what polarization does is it creates clear lines for sides that you should be taking on moral issues in particular that demand a verdict. See, if you think the middle road is an appropriate place for any moral position, much less a Christian, then eventually you will find yourself, as Miyagi said,
walk middle, sooner or later, get the squish, just like grape.
Like with the issue of abortion, it's either life or death. There really is no in between, as much as people want to try to convince you that you can be pro-choice and pro-life. So all that to say this, that if Trump has done anything, it is to show that there is a clear division between right and left in America, and it is one that we need to understand and never forget. Now, he goes further to try to suggest that this line doesn't exist by telling us something that is truly rich, and that is that the Democratic Party is normal. I mean, Kamala is normal.
Who doesn't love a yellow school bus, right? Can you raise your hand if you love a yellow school bus, right? Just, there's something about and most of us, many of us went to school on the yellow school bus, right?
This is the woman that has come out and said that she wants to make sure that they get gender-affirming care to those people struggling in prison so that we can take those male rapists, transition them into females, get them a nice fitting wig and all, and then send them over to the women's prison.
I made sure that they changed the policy in the state of California so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to the medical care that they desired and need.
Makes total sense, doesn't it? Now, this normal party includes the San Francisco Gay Man's Choir.
I will convert your children, yes we will.
Drag Queen Story Hour, and most recently, Planned Parenthood clinics outside the Democratic National Convention. Now, I love this PolitiFact fact check here, because it starts by saying this: the Democratic National Convention is not offering free abortions. So apparently what I just said is misinformation. You know, these Republicans and their misinformation. But read on. The Planned Parenthood branch is providing free medication, abortions, and vasectomies by appointment only. Oh, okay. So it's not free abortions, you silly Republican conservative, with all of your misinformation. It's free abortions and vasectomies only if you have an appointment. Okay, totally makes sense. So, I mean, after all, I guess we could argue that the Malthusian anti-humanist should not only preach, but practice what they're preaching. So have at it, guys. Keep on, annihilating your lineage while we keep on having babies, if you want to do that. But let's just make it really, really crystal clear here that at the Republican National Convention, you may not have liked Donald Trump having Hulk Hogan on stage, and you might have thought that was farcical. But there is something way more farcical. That's having Planned Parenthood show up with their 20-foot inflatable IUD and then give men vasectomies and abort babies there just to celebrate what the Democratic Party is all about. So forgive me if I don't agree that Donald Trump killed politics in America. I think Donald Trump is nothing less than the coroner. He's the pallbearer. He's the one that showed how wicked and corrupt politics actually is, but it predates him. And in fact, if you want to put it at the feet of anybody, put it at the feet of Barack Obama, who in 2012 made sure to racialize politics so that he could get back into office because he needed to make Mitt Romney look like a dude who would put y'all back in chains.
We're going to put you all back in chains.
So we've heard Sam's side of the story, and unimpressed is what I would say. Let's hear Ben's side of the story and if he has any reason that is logical to vote for Donald Trump.
Ben, let's go to you.
Sure,
Obviously, you're not voting for Kamala Harris.
You may have noticed, yes. So obviously, I'm coming at this from precisely the opposite point of view. I've given money to President Trump. I've campaigned with President Trump. I brought President Trump to Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson's Ohel on October 7th, where he met with hostage families. So I'm very involved in this campaign. So I'm going to use a bit of a different model. I think that Sam is coming from the point of view that Trump is preemptively disqualified from the race. Just period, start to finish, we're done. And that ends the calculation. For me, the question is, were you better off in 2019 or are you better off in 2024? And the way that I view this political race is that basically you have this strainer that is American politics. That's the political system, and that involves the constitutional checks and balances. It involves the back and forth of politics. It involves the rhetoric. And what goes into the strainer is what the candidate brings to the table. And very often that's rhetoric, that's policy, that's staffing. That's all the mess that whatever candidate brings. And they stuff all of that stuff, that entire cholent, into the strainer. And what comes out the other end of the strainer is the thing that I'm adjudicating based upon. And after the strainer in 2019, what I got was a solid economy, the best foreign policy of my lifetime, a president whose rhetoric I very often didn't like, but who had made the country stronger in a variety of ways. And as of 2024, what I see is an administration, and Kamala Harris is the vice president of that administration, who I believe actually probably has a constitutional duty to get rid of the person above her, who that administration has produced a world that is on fire in a myriad of ways, has produced 40-year highs in inflation, has not, in fact, calmed the waters. I know Sam was talking about normalcy. The reality is that Donald Trump has not been president for the last 3.5 years. And not only have we not returned to normalcy, things seem to have gotten significantly worse. In fact, if we were going to sort of describe Donald Trump's role in American politics, I think that one of the differences between Sam and me is that Sam would sort of declare Donald Trump the murderer of American politics, where I would see Donald Trump more as the coroner of American politics, that things were really, really bad before Donald Trump actually entered the American political scene, which is how he became president of the United States in the first place. And Donald Trump simply being defeated would not make any of that go away because, frankly, it didn't in 2020. And so the calculation for me is very simple. Donald Trump was a better president than Kamala Harris would be, with all of Donald Trump's flaws, with all of his excesses. And because we do have a very robust and durable constitutional system, almost built to hem in his flaws and excesses, what that means is that I get a lot of good policy that I wouldn't get with Kamala Harris. I do get a stronger American presence on the world scene with regard to America's allies. I get a better economy. And I think it would serve as a corrective to a Democratic Party that seems to have spun out into a world of damaging wokeness, because the Democratic Party is either going to force itself further into this sort of left-wing corner, or they're going to have to moderate and deal with the reality, which is if they lose to Donald Trump twice in 3 election cycles, there's something deeply wrong that cannot simply be corrected by swiveling further to the left. Now, in my humble opinion, I think what you just saw there was a cogent argument, much more rational compared to anything that Sam Harris had to say. So first of all, Ben shows us that Democrats have made life worse for everyone since 2020. This is objectively true. There's multiple wars going on the world stage. Inflation has made it almost impossible to try to afford almost anything anymore. Everybody knows that Bidenomics was a complete and utter failure. And we can argue back and forth about how much of this has to do directly with policies from Joe Biden. But please just don't blame Donald Trump for what is going on right now. It is clearly as a result of Kamala and Biden. Then the other thing I would add to that is this, is that in order to make Trump this uniquely bad candidate and Kamala Harris better, you would have to be not only blind for the last 4 years, but blind from 2016 on. Because Trump was president, and a simple Reagan-esque question should suffice.
Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago?
The answer to that question is so obvious, I will spare you any more argumentation to that effect. And I'll just say this. Ben's argument is clearly cogent and based upon objective fact. Sam's argument is based upon fear-mongering and an emotional, visceral reaction to Donald Trump. So you can decide to do what you want to do at the end of the day, but I think it is clear that one of these guys has a leg to stand on and the other one does not. And this is most pronounced as we get into the dreaded, the horrible January 6th, the most deadliest day ever in the history of days. And that's what Ben and Sam will talk about next. There have been a couple assassination attempts on President Trump. Let's assume that Trump wins the election. Would assassination, if we are that afraid that he is going to be Hitlerian, then be an appropriate response? Or, less provocatively, would it be an appropriate response for Kamala Harris, who would be the presiding officer in the Senate, she's the vice president of the United States, to refuse to certify the election if Donald Trump were to win? Because obviously, if he's this grave and abiding a threat, so outside the norm of our politics, so far outside the possibility of a real normal politics that it can't be fixed, would she be right to do that, for example?
Sam?
That's a question for me on that final point?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, first of all, you can flip that around. If you think Trump's attempt to hold on to power in 2020, if you think all of this business about pressuring Pence not to certify the election was in any way legitimate and is in any way not disqualifying for him to run for a second term, well then... Well,
legitimate is not disqualifying. Those are not quite the same thing. I think it was illegitimate and not disqualifying.
Well, it's gradations of the same problem. But I mean, anyone who supported that on any level, as his running mate J.D. Vance claims to, should support Kamala Harris doing the same thing. I know the law has changed in the interim, happily, but you should support that kind of behavior now that Kamala Harris and Biden are in power and overseeing this election. And of course,
But
I would never support such a thing. Babes, you've asked me essentially whether I think Trump is Orange Hitler, right? And I never have, and I've never taken those concerns entirely seriously. But I would point out that the leading scholars of fascism at this point, I mean, people like Robert Paxton, use the term in application to Trump, and it's not an empty epithet, right? It's not the same thing as saying that Trump is the next Hitler figure or the next Putin figure. I think there are very few people who think he wants to create the 1,000-year Reich. I mean, he wants to build condos and play golf, right? I mean, we're talking about a game show host, right, who got marketed for 12 years on television as a brilliant businessman, and half the country bought it, right? And a quarter of the country has rallied to him like he's the Messiah, and another quarter is willing just to look the other way as he desecrates the most basic norms of our democracy. And the most important one, which he's desecrated, is not committing to a peaceful transfer of power. I mean, that is, from my point of view, the only thing you need to know about him to decide your vote in this election is that as a sitting president, he did not commit and would not commit, and still hasn't committed, frankly, to a peaceful transfer of power.
So that's right. Trump is a fascist. Now, he's not Orange Hitler, Sam tells us, but, you know, he probably is Orange Mussolini. I mean, at least, right? He's definitely a fascist. I mean, look what happened on January 6th. So Sam's contention seems to be predicated just simply upon this. And I would say that the best argument Democrats have is the way that Donald Trump behaved on January 6th, but even at that, they don't have much of an argument. And this is why they have to resort, as Sam did, to things like Trump is a fascist because of January 6th, but also, you know, the Teen USA thing, right? And all those convictions that were not planned by the DOJ to try to go after a political opponent. By the way, you should know this, that even PolitiFact would not rate the claim about Trump and the Teen USA pageant as true, because it is all based upon secondary information that could not be corroborated whatsoever. But let's get to the biggie here. Let's go through the timeline of January 6th, and then we can really see if Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy based upon his behavior on that day. And I'll be the first to admit, I didn't like it very much. I think Donald Trump could have handled it differently. But let's just see if his behavior warrants what the left is freaking out about. So I want to go through the timeline really quick for you, and you can do this yourself. You can go to the congressional records on this, but then you can also look at Trump's tweeting throughout the day. So we all know that Trump goes to the ellipse, and for about 70 minutes he speaks, and then he tells people to patriotically and peacefully protest, which is almost always left out of the narrative. Or if it's not, people suggest that it's not enough simply. So you can think what you want to about that, but nonetheless, he does say peacefully and patriotically protest when you go over there. And so when he says fight, it is meant to be understood in a euphemistic sense. And then at 1:45, and this is when the action kind of starts to begin, there are people that go into the Capitol, and it is declared a riot. And some say that they are warning people who are entering and trying to calm things down. Now, the first thing I have to say to you is this. At 1:45, this is happening. And the riot is something that they still believe that they can calm down by warning people. So obviously, things have not heated up to the point that they would eventually. And then at 2:14, so about 30 minutes later, that's when Mike Pence is finally removed, simply because the riot starts to get out of control and is not being handled very well. So I would argue that at 2:14 is actually when things really got out of hand, and then the riot started to become an issue. And then only 10 minutes later, Trump tweets out that Mike Pence did not act in our best interest. So you may argue to yourself right there, isn't that disqualifying behavior because Pence is having to be removed? And then at 2:24, 10 minutes later, Trump is talking about Mike Pence and stirring up the ire of people toward Mike Pence? Well, the congressional record shows that Donald Trump did not know at this point in time that Mike Pence had been removed, because he isn't informed until 2:26 that Pence has been removed. And then 10 minutes later, that's when Trump first tweets out and urges that everybody should stay peaceful. Then at 2:44, that's when Ashley Babbitt is shot. Now, it's important to know that Trump at that point in time, we don't know when he knows about Ashley Babbitt. But it isn't until 3 hours later that Ashley actually dies. But we do know this. About 30 minutes later, after Ashley Babbitt is shot, it does seem that Trump knows about it. And then Trump does this again. After already telling everyone to stay peaceful, he says, everyone should stay peaceful and respectful of police instructions. And then about an hour later, Trump makes a video urging everybody to go home. Now, you can say a lot about what Trump did that day. I don't like it, you don't like it. But the fact is you don't know exactly what took place and when Trump knew what he knew. So the way he responded is of some subject of debate, and maybe he could have been a little bit more forceful. Sure, I'll give you that. But the one thing you cannot say is that Trump acted like a fascist that day and he was trying to overturn the election. That is patently absurd, and the information that is available to us does not communicate that whatsoever. So here's the sum total of the debate, and by extension, the debate for atheism in my mind. In the same way that Sam Harris hates Donald Trump and clearly did not make his case against Trump in this debate, he hates Christianity, the Bible, and Christians. That is to say, he is blinded by irrational hatred towards something that he doesn't understand. There's another name for this kind of irrationalism. It's called feminism.
Well, what does that have to do with anything?
No. He's got a point.
All right, I'm just kidding, ladies. My wife hates it when I joke like that, too. But what it's really called is emotivism. And that's a good term for you to know. Essentially, emotivism is this, and it is the spirit of the age, that moral statements do not express factual claims, but rather emotional attitudes or feelings. So for all the talk of atheists bringing enlightenment, rationalism, and science to the religious debate, there's nothing rational about it. And its objections are not objective. All atheists give us are their emotions and their feelings largely when they talk about religion. This is why the new atheists have been some of the most unimpressive and unuseful people in recent memory. And it is all because they are simply motivated by their feelings of disgust and hate for religion. Now, let me be the first to admit, I have a top 10 list of things I hate. They include people who hurt children, progressive Christians, people who call themselves scholars and act like total morons. Usually they'll have doctor in their social media handles. People who use preferred pronouns, a man that would hurt a woman, a man that would pretend to be a woman, and you get the point. I'd be happy at the drop of a hat to preach against any of those things purely from rage because they are loathsome. However, my anger is absolutely justified when directed towards any of those things I just mentioned. You know why? Because they are evil. The problem here is not hatred in general. The problem here is blind hatred toward the good. If you are so blinded by ideology that you cannot see that Christianity is a net positive for society, that it created the Western world, and that if you remove it, you have no idea what will become of our society, then you are not just a fool. You are dangerous. And it's high time Christians started paying attention to this. We need to start talking this way to atheists because they not only deserve a spanking, but they really need one. In other words, if you hate something that is objectively good, then you are the bad guy in the story, even if you think you're the good guy. And we should do something about that. But this is what happens when you eradicate an objective standard like a good God that can define good and evil. Without God, you can hate what is good and you can love what is evil and everything twice. I would never suggest that those suffering from Trump derangement syndrome can stop hating Trump and then all of a sudden they'll be good people. But there is a cure for God derangement syndrome, and it's an absolute cure. So I encourage you to take it, and it's repentance and faith. And frankly, it's the only cure for bad thinking. If you can't go that far, at least admit this. Blind hatred towards something that is objectively good is evil. This is all the new atheists have ever offered. This is all that Sam Harris gives us. And for that reason, anyone who follows them is a fool. But then again, the Bible does say that he who has said in his heart there is no God is a fool. All right, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and go with God.